In a shocking moment that has left many questioning the true nature of power and privilege, a routine police stop escalates into something no one could have predicted. What started as a typical encounter between law enforcement and a civilian turned into a life-altering event when a racist officer, fueled by prejudice, violently strikes a black woman during a traffic stop. But it doesn't end there. Just when everyone thought the situation was spiraling out of control, something incredible happens, something that changes the entire dynamic of the encounter. As the officer, who initially shows no remorse, realizes the identity of the woman he's assaulted, his entire demeanor shifts in an instant. The man who was once quick to use force now finds himself on his knees, begging for mercy. The reason for this dramatic change? It's a revelation that no one saw coming. But what could possibly make this officer go from aggression to submission? The black woman, clearly shaken by the violence she faced, stands there in disbelief as the officer pleads for forgiveness. What happened next is a turning point in the story, but we're only just getting started. How did the officer learn who she really was? And what will be the consequences of his actions, both for him and for the woman at the center of it all? Stay tuned, because the truth behind this encounter is more than just shocking. It's a story about power, race, and the unexpected twists that can change everything. What happens next will leave you questioning the very system that's supposed to protect us all. The woman at the center of this incident wasn't just any random person. Her name was Maya Williams, a prominent community leader who had been fighting for justice and equality for years. Known for her vocal activism, Maya had become a symbol of resistance against systemic racism in the very city she now found herself in the middle of this life-threatening encounter. The officer who struck her, Officer Taylor, was well known in the area for his aggressive approach to law enforcement, often showing an unmistakable bias when it came to black residents. That day, Maya was simply driving home from a community meeting, her mind still focused on the issues they discussed: how to bring more awareness to police brutality and how to push for real change. She hadn't anticipated being pulled over, and certainly not for something as minor as an expired tag. But when Officer Taylor approached her car with an aggressive attitude, it was clear this was about more than just paperwork. His tone was harsh, his demeanor condescending. There was no reason for him to escalate things, but he did, pushing Maya to a point where she had no choice but to stand up for herself. It was when she calmly asked for his badge number, something she'd learned was important when dealing with officers like him, that the situation took a dark turn. Taylor snapped, his patience running thin as he accused her of being disrespectful. In a swift, terrifying motion, he struck her, the force of the punch sending her reeling back in her seat. But just as quickly as the rage had taken hold, something shifted when he caught a glimpse of her name on the ID she handed him: Maya Williams. His face drained of color, his earlier aggression faltering. He froze for a moment, his eyes widening in recognition, before he dropped to his knees, the shock of what he'd just done overwhelming him. What was it about her identity that caused such a dramatic change? The story wasn't over yet, but it had already taken a wild turn that none of them could have seen coming. As Officer Taylor knelt in front of Maya, his face pale and his hands trembling, the confusion in her mind grew. She stared at him, her heart still racing from the punch, trying to process what was happening. Why was he reacting like this? What did he know about her that would make him, of all people, beg for mercy? It was in that brief, intense moment that the gravity of the situation began to settle in. This wasn't just about a routine traffic stop anymore. It was about something far bigger, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. The city Maya had spent so much of her life trying to improve was deeply divided. The police force, led by a small but powerful faction of officers like Taylor, had earned a reputation for targeting black residents. But despite the injustices, Maya always believed that change was possible if the community kept fighting, kept demanding better. And yet, this encounter with Taylor felt like a wake-up call, a painful reminder of how deep those divides really ran. Officer Taylor's reaction wasn't about guilt. Maya realized it was fear. He wasn't kneeling because he felt remorse for what he had done. He was kneeling because he knew exactly who she was. The name Maya Williams carried weight, both in the city and beyond. Maya had become an influential voice in the fight for racial justice, her speeches stirring the hearts of thousands. She had rallied protests, pushed for policy changes, and held city officials accountable for their actions. But most importantly, she had exposed the darker side of law enforcement. And now here she was, a target. But what was Taylor's connection to all of this? Was he simply reacting to her status as an activist, or was there something more sinister at play? Was his fear personal? Did he have something to hide? Maya's mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. In the distance, sirens began to wail, and Maya's thoughts snapped back to reality. The longer she stood there, the more the tension in the air thickened. Would backup arrive soon? Would they side with her, or would they back Taylor, turning this moment into yet another instance of an officer being protected, no matter the wrongdoing? She wanted to scream, to demand answers from Taylor right there, but she knew better than to let her anger control her. Her mind sharpened, her voice steady as she finally spoke. "What are you afraid of, Officer Taylor? What is it that you're not telling me?" But before he could answer, the sound of tires screeching echoed in the street. A black SUV, tinted windows blocking any view of the inside, pulled up next to them, its engine cutting off abruptly. Maya's heart skipped a beat. Whoever was in that SUV clearly knew what was happening, and they weren't here to make things better. Maya's eyes locked onto the SUV as it came to a screeching halt just feet away from her and Officer Taylor. The thick, tinted windows didn't give away anything about the people inside, but the heavy silence that followed was enough to send a chill down her spine. She could feel the weight of something dangerous in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Officer Taylor's trembling hands clenched into fists. The color in his face hadn't returned, and his eyes darted nervously between Maya and the vehicle. He had stopped begging, but the fear in his eyes hadn't faded. It was as though whatever was about to happen next was out of his control. And yet, he didn't make a move to get up, even though the tension was becoming unbearable. Maya stood tall, her back straight, but inside, her pulse was racing. She wasn't sure who had just arrived, but she had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be someone who was going to help her. The city she'd fought to change had always had its shadows, and she'd spent years trying to shed light on them. But now she was standing in one of those shadows, unsure of who or what was about to emerge from it. The SUV door opened slowly, and out stepped a tall man dressed in a dark suit. He looked ordinary enough, but there was something about the way he moved, calm, deliberate, almost like he knew exactly what was going to happen next. He didn't even glance at Maya. His eyes were fixed solely on Officer Taylor, and the moment their gazes met, it was like the rest of the world faded away. "Get up, Taylor," the man said, his voice low, almost too calm. The words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. She'd heard that voice before. It was the same one that had spoken at closed-door meetings she'd once tried to infiltrate, where corrupt city officials and shady law enforcement officers made deals, protected their own, and silenced those who dared to speak out. Maya's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just any man. This was someone who had connections, someone who could control things from behind the scenes. Officer Taylor slowly got to his feet, wiping the sweat from his brow. His movements were stiff, like he was obeying an order he couldn't refuse. The man in the suit didn't move, only watched, his gaze calculating, predatory. "Did you think she was just some random protester?" The man's words were aimed at Taylor, but they felt like a threat to Maya. "You should have known better." Maya could feel her heart thudding in her chest. Was this some kind of setup? Was this why Officer Taylor had attacked her in the first place? Was she a target? Asterisk again asterisk. Because of her activism, because of the power she had started to build. The man's eyes shifted briefly toward her, his gaze cold and assessing. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black device, something that looked like a remote of some kind. He pressed a button, and the sound of a distant engine revving echoed from somewhere far off. Maya's mind spun. What was going on? What was happening now? Before she could process the question, the sound of footsteps began to approach from behind her. And then, just as quickly, the ground beneath her seemed to shift. Something wasn't right. Something was about to break. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer, and Maya instinctively tensed, her muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. She turned her head slightly, catching a glimpse of movement in the corner of her eye. Her breath hitched. Behind her, a second car had appeared. This one, much more subtle, blending into the shadows of the alleyway. It hadn't made a sound as it pulled in, but now its headlights blazed to life, casting a harsh glare over the street. Maya squinted against the light, her pulse quickening. Who else was involved in this? The figure emerging from the car was tall, cloaked in a dark hoodie that obscured most of their features, but Maya could feel the weight of their presence, like a predator circling its prey. As the figure stepped forward, Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. It was another asterisk officer. But this one wasn't from the local force. Maya had seen enough body cams and police reports to recognize the insignia on the officer's uniform. A specialized unit from a higher-level police department. The kind of unit that didn't operate under public scrutiny. The kind that existed in the shadows. Maya's mind raced, trying to make sense of the tangled web that was quickly forming. Was this part of a larger operation? Had they been watching her all along? It wasn't just a local issue anymore. This was bigger, much bigger than she could have imagined. The man in the suit didn't seem surprised by the new arrival, but his expression hardened. "What took you so long?" he asked the officer coldly, his tone sharp. The officer in the hoodie didn't respond right away. Instead, they reached into a bag at their side and pulled out a tablet, the screen glowing bright in the night. Maya could barely make out the words on the screen, but the officer's finger hovered over a particular document, as if preparing to confirm something. Her stomach churned as she wondered what kind of information could be on that tablet, and whether it was about her. Then, without a word, the officer in the hoodie glanced up, locking eyes with Maya for the first time. There was no sympathy in their gaze, no recognition of the injustice they had just witnessed, only cold indifference, and something more sinister, knowledge. They knew exactly who she was, and what she had been fighting for, but it wasn't her activism that seemed to be the focus. No, it was something much deeper, darker. "She's the one," the officer said flatly. "It's her." Maya's blood ran cold. "It's me," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. But the officer wasn't looking at her anymore. They were looking at the man in the suit, and as their eyes met, the tension in the air became suffocating, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Whatever this was, it was more than just an act of police brutality. It was part of a larger plan, and Maya had just become a key player. The officer in the hoodie tapped something on the tablet, and the man in the suit nodded, a grim smile creeping onto his face. He looked back at Maya, his eyes calculating, as if he had just made a decision. "You don't realize it yet," he said slowly, "but you're already in too deep." And just like that, everything Maya thought she understood about her fight for justice was turned upside down. She had always known the system was broken, but now she was starting to realize just how far the corruption ran and how much danger she was truly in. The SUV, the officer, the man in the suit, they were all pieces in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. A game where the stakes were much higher than she could have ever imagined. Maya took a slow, steadying breath, trying to push down the growing sense of panic. She needed answers, but more than that, she needed to escape. Because whatever was coming next wasn't going to end with just a punch. It was much bigger, much darker, and she didn't know if she could survive it. But one thing was clear, she couldn't back down now. Not when she was this close to uncovering the truth. Maya's heart pounded as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The officer in the hoodie, the man in the suit, the strange, oppressive silence. It all pointed to something far bigger than just a corrupt cop abusing his power. She had thought she was fighting a system that needed reform, But now she realized she was up against something far more dangerous, an organized network operating under the radar, pulling strings in the very heart of the city. And she had unknowingly walked right into its trap.